suspended for the time being. And we're all just trying to get by here in terms of what we can do and when we can do it. My path to graduate school was a relatively straightforward one. As an undergraduate, I was introduced to research through an honors seminar that I was in. I went to Rutgers University in New Brunswick. And when I learned about research, I wasn't quite sure how knowledge was even made and didn't even understand that knowledge was made or discovered before I took this class, but I learned what research was. I was like, oh, there's this thing called research. And then I started essentially working as a de facto project manager for the person who was running that honors seminar. And then I was a laboratory coordinator for 2 years in upstate New York at the University of Rochester. And using a variety of sort of connections and experience, I made my way into a PhD program at Yale. And it was a wonderful, wonderful 5 years. And then I trained at Harvard for a couple of years in what's called a postdoctoral situation. And then after my postdoctoral training, I was eventually hired at Barnard in the midst of a terrible, terrible, terrible recession in 2000, between 2007 and 2009, I think was when I was during my postdoc, and everything was really, really hard and bad. And it seemed like there were very few opportunities, and just waited it out. And then my dream job came up, and look at me now, everything's fine. So that was my path to Barnard and some of the background and how I achieved that path.
Thanks, Professor. Professor Mukherjee, thanks for joining us. I know that you had you're a busy person this summer with a lot going on. Just to get you up, we're basically kind of doing opening salvos, paths from undergraduate into research, and where you are right now.
Okay, I'm really sorry for joining late. It's interesting. I've had some interesting internet issues because of power failures and Con Ed issues. So this is, we are living in a Zoom world, and we rely on internet. And I think we are all have different experiences. So yeah, well, thank you for inviting me to speak to the students. And I guess I wish we could be there in person, but we are not. So I think what you want me to do is just talk about how I got here, right? So, I did an undergraduate in physics. One thing I wanted to mention is that I didn't, my undergraduate wasn't in the US, and I did not have a liberal arts undergraduate sort of experience. I had to pretty much decide when I was 16 that, math and science is what I will do. And that's a very young age to take that decision. And so I really appreciate what I see at Barnard and Columbia and the liberal arts education in the US, where you are allowed to change your major, and you are allowed to change your mind, and you don't have to decide and set things in place when you're 17, which is it is challenging. But I did it. I guess the one thing I had going for me is that I knew that I liked math and science. Now, whether it was physics or chemistry or material science or engineering, I hadn't quite figured it out. So I sort of got into physics, and then came to the US on a graduate research fellowship without really knowing what direction I'm going to go into. I didn't really have a game plan. I just knew that I would come to graduate school and fell into things sort of arbitrarily. I got my PhD at Columbia. I was involved with a group that was building detectors for space. And so that's sort of, that's how I got into graduate research. And then, I really can't say that I had my whole sort of career planned and everything was set up. It just was sort of random things falling in place at random times. So the one thing that I always tell young people is that there's no need, some people are lucky and they have a game plan and things fall in place. And for others, for most people that I talk to, actually, things happen and you come to a point where you take decisions and you say, well, I'm going to go this way or this way. And you just sort of go with the flow. In my case, that's what happened. I did my PhD. There was an opportunity that opened up. In physics, there's this big sort of field called particle physics where you build detectors. And in the US at that time, I think you guys are all very young, but at that time, this is kind of historical, there was this big effort to build the world's largest particle accelerator. And they were going to put it in Texas, and they dug a big hole, and there was a tunnel that was being built. They were hiring people like crazy. I went in for a job interview. They came and picked me up from the airport in a limousine, and they were going to offer me the job right away, and I was all ready to take it. But what happened was there was the grant was cut. There was a line item veto in the budget. The whole program was scrapped. The US did not build a particle detector. And, so this is one of the crossroads. I didn't go in that direction. If I had, I probably would not have a job at all. But something else came up at NASA, and I just went in there, and that was kind of like it opened up. So, if I hadn't explored that direction or hadn't taken that road, who knows? So one thing that I kind of always, tell people is that you don't have to necessarily have a game plan. I mean, things will open up, and then, you can make it work for you and adapt and work with people. And, I was very fortunate that I was always with people who supported me in the sciences. I was with people who I learned a lot from. And, so I think that's kind of my experience. What I did after going to NASA, in sciences, as Colleen said, you gain experience by doing these postdoctoral experiences. Those are short-term jobs, you do them for 2-3 years. And then the Barnard job opened up. I came in for an interview, and then things fell in place. And I have been at Barnard since 1997, and I really enjoyed working here because of the connections with students. So that's kind of like a brief bio. But you're welcome to ask me questions.
I love getting your stories. We work so closely on things like SRI in the summer, and I don't think I've ever actually had the three of you tell me the stories that you've. So I appreciate the different paths that you described. And Professor Mukherjee, I want to pick up on something that you emphasized, and this came up in the previous comments too. I think it speaks to some of the things that are on a lot of students' mind today. So maybe we can dive into kind of current conditions. Is this anxiety around the notion of having an interrupted summer? And I think all three of you mentioned kind of unexpected twists and turns, things that you had to kind of push against. Can you talk about, what it means to be resilient to circumstances that are in front of you, and maybe speak specifically about, if you're a student facing COVID with research interruptions right now, how do you kind of recover from that? How would you think about students being in a position where, there might be something like a gap in a summer on their resume, and there's a lot of anxiety about graduate school and, future potential professional opportunities related to that? Maybe Brian or Colleen, if you want to kick it off, and we'll go back down the line.
Sure. So yeah, I guess two main things to say. The first is that there are plenty of things that you can do that will still look impressive, okay, in terms of training, but also as a sign of initiative. And oftentimes in graduate school, your research background, really more than anything, is a sign of initiative. Sometimes a lot of schools will take people that they have extensive research backgrounds, not because those are skills that are directly translatable or useful in their particular lab. They will still need to be trained, but this is a screening process to look for self-sufficiency, initiative, chutzpah, right? And so that's the first thing to say, and we can talk more. It's going to differ by discipline as to what that initiative will look like in terms of what you can do in a restrictive world. That's the first thing to say. And the second thing to say is you have to remember that when you're applying to graduate school, you are being compared to a pool of your peers, all of which have experienced the same problems you are experiencing. You are not special. You are delightfully not special in your pain. This is, it's a great thing to be all at a disadvantage. That's what you want. If you're going to be at a disadvantage, you want to all be at a disadvantage, right? If you are entering into a particular cohort where people are looking for a certain amount or type of experience, you will all have been restricted. So this is one of those situations where not being special is great. So I guess that's basically, I think, how I would mentally frame it for myself. It's also deeply true. So those are basically the two main messages I would have to say in terms of wrapping your head around the disappointment of having your opportunity restricted. There are things you can do, and everybody else is restricted as well.
Yeah, because you're sort of saying it's a crappy summer, right? You're not. A lot of people would have been doing SRI this summer, and that's this traditional stepping stone, right? So, okay, I'm pouring salt on a wound, so that's bad. But I think what happens, well, it's funny. I always tell my students, you don't always see the forest through the trees, because when you're at Barnard, you're sort of doing stuff. You're in there fighting every day, and you don't realize how well you're doing big picture, right? Because sometimes you just, especially with any type of research for me, basically 90% of the time you're just failing at research, right? Things are going wrong, and you don't see the big picture of how many good things are happening. And I think it's true for Barnard. When all of our students go out and apply, they look really good. And one of the reasons for that is also because we also have the senior thesis. And I know, when I'm talking to all of our colleagues, we're all thinking about how we're going to still keep our senior thesis capstone strong, for this year. So it's going to be different, right? Maybe how you get the data and how you do it. But I think it's sort of what you're saying is you're still going to have this, you'll make the best of the situation. So you're still going to look better than everyone else, right? Because you've been able to you're still going to go in this fall. We'll have our senior thesis. You're going to be working with data. So it's going to be a little bit different than maybe how we were hoping to do our senior theses. But I think there's still a lot of great things going on. And I think it's you're going to get all these opportunities that are going to still be coming at you, right? And they're going to look different than they would have a year ago. So just take advantage of them when you see them. And when you see that when that opportunity comes for you, just make sure you do well, right? It might be different, right? You're not going to be right? Students aren't going to be knocking on my door anymore. We'll be doing the Zoom calls. So it's when you do the Zoom call, oh, okay, I have this data now to show. Can we discuss it? That type of stuff. So still be prepared, to do well in this new environment. And I think we're all from our end, we're all working on trying to give you that chance, especially with all of our capstone senior thesis works. This way it still sets you up well for grad school. And then they also know you have all these alums before you that are going through the process, and they're really paving the way for you because they've seen them all do really well. So it's I've had a lot of colleagues saying oh, let me know when you have another student, so-and-so was great in the lab. So I think you're just trying to take advantage of these things as they come. You can keep moving along.
And maybe be not so picky. And I'm not accusing anybody of being picky, but in case you were feeling picky, this is a bad time to be picky, right? If you were just I don't know, I kind of wanted to work with primary data, not secondary data. It's well, you have a choice. You can work with secondary data because primary data is not being gathered right now. So you're not going to get training in how to gather it in a meaningful way, or you can do nothing. Yeah. Right? It's if it may force you into learning skills that are necessary in a very changing world right now. Learning how to work with secondary data sets, learning how to do meta-analyses, learning how to take existing data and mine it for other parameters that are perhaps novel. it might not be what the vision that you had for how you wanted to do research, but if you're interested in the content, you need to think creatively about how to get it. And you also need to understand that there are some professors who can't adapt their research program quickly to the new and changing world. So there will be slightly fewer research opportunities. So I guess take whatever is even mildly interesting to you and just do your best at it. And try to work with the professor that you're working with to maybe steer it towards something that you're more interested in. So I guess there's a sort of rejiggering of the expectations that you might have for the type of work you can get done.
I'm going to follow up on you there, Colleen, because I think sometimes when you can work on your favorite topic, it's a beautiful thing, right? It's like, but a lot of times, even that doesn't happen. So it's just, and the topic doesn't really matter in the long run, as you're saying. I think it's you're learning these skills, and even when you go to graduate school, if you work on a different topic, they want to hear that you could like investigate something, you could talk about it, you could get passionate about it. Doesn't like it's not so much the topic. They want to see that you were you took a question and you really went for it. That's sort of the important. Like you're excited to do the science. And then like if people see that and then you say like I'm excited to work in this new area, that they're gonna believe you and they'll give you that chance.
It's a really good opportunity to be expansive and synthetic because you are forced to do things like read literature that you might not normally connect, because when you're busy doing things, you don't necessarily have the chance to like think about things, right? I mean, certainly that's the way it is in my discipline. So it really is a great opportunity for you to just knock the socks off of professors if you come back in the fall and you're just like, look, I read your body of work and here's what's missing.
So that gets to us. I want to pull Professor Mukherjee back into the conversation too. What are some of, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this, and then maybe if we can pivot towards some practical things that students can do, like what is like step A, step B, step B to show those kinds of sentiments that you want to convey to faculty.
Yeah.
Professor.
So, I think that Colleen and Brian just said it really well. I'm just going to pick up on a couple of things and just say it again, and just maybe just to sort of assert it again. The one thing, I think that Colleen said this, keep in mind that you can do other things. You can gain experience in other things. Don't be picky. For example, you could pick up some coding skills, even if you don't have any research opportunities. Take advantage. I think the one thing that graduate or any post, undergraduate experience, what they will be looking for is how have you adapted? What new skills have you picked up? Have you done something with your time? So it doesn't really matter. It's just what you're doing, but it does matter that you're not sitting there feeling sort of defeated and I'm not going to do anything. What am I going to do? Just try to get into something. And it doesn't have to be research. It can be just picking up a skill. It can be taking a class. It can be doing something online. It can be, just something that you are doing with your time. The other thing to keep in mind is, and Brian mentioned this, we are at a difficult situation right now, but you will get out of it. And then 2 years, a few years down the road, I don't know, I don't want to predict, you will look back on this and this is going to be a short blip. So this will pass. So don't, keep your long-term focus, and just be patient and try to do something with your time now. And maybe AJ, you can kick this off, and we can maybe talk about some of these more practical things that one can do.
Yeah, I think that's a great segue. And we've focused some of the conversation, understandably, given your respective backgrounds so far, on kind of thinking about prepping for graduate school. I think it'd be helpful to hear your thoughts about taking time between undergrad and graduate school, especially given these complicated circumstances right now, to reframe and clarify your kind of long-term ambitions. Professor Mukherjee, just thinking about what you just said there, keep your eye on the long term. Mm-hmm. But I think I want to underline some of the concrete things that the three of you have mentioned so far. reaching out to faculty proactively over the summer. Professor Mayu, you were saying, you know, I have this data set, I'd like to talk to you about this, setting a clear agenda for a check-in at some point during the summer. You know, Professor Mukherjee, you mentioned developing skills. I put into the chat some areas where you can develop some technical skills. This has been a repeated theme throughout this week. Every single day, someone has mentioned that one thing you can do productively this summer is develop some technical capacities that can be an asset to faculty in the lab. It can also be an asset to your career path. So just thinking about, you know, and Professor McCrink, I want to come back to you. You know, how do you knock the socks off? You know, what is the way to approach a faculty member? Because I think there's a lot of anxiety to even under typical circumstances, about asking for research, asking for a place in a research lab, and then asking for letters of recommendation for whatever comes next. So what are some, let me start with you this time, you know, what are some pieces of advice that you can offer about approaching faculty in a way that doesn't feel artificial or awkward or uncomfortable for students who may be, you know, struggling to initiate conversations?
So the one thing that, you know, so I'm in physics, in astrophysics, astronomy, so we work with data sets. One thing that we have been able to do this summer is basically work on data sets that we already have existing. So we have large data sets, Colleen mentioned. You know, we are not observing. The telescope behind me is sitting there, parked. You know, it's a real telescope, but it's sitting there, not taking data. Everything has been covered up, you know. However, we do have large data sets. So the one thing, when I see you know, like sometimes I have first-year students approaching me for research, and if I'm not able to take them on, I usually tell them that just pick up some computing skills. So Python, you know, Python is something that is being used extensively beyond physics, astronomy, and data structures, you know, in computing. So, and Python is actually something, is a programming language that is well documented. There are lots of free resources. You can go online and you can take a systematic free course and train yourself, you know. So basically, I mean, one thing, what I've been telling some students is, even if we're in this COVID situation, right? Even if you go into the data that New York State archives, you can download that data and plot it in Python. You know, do it for yourself. There's a lot of coding, working with data sets that you can start working on. The other thing is, you could go one step further. There's a lot of work that is happening on deep learning, which is basically working with data sets to try to do image analysis. And there's, again, a lot of material that's available online. So if you're not doing research and you're basically at home, but you have a computer, if you picked up some of these computing skills and you came back at the end of this, you know, when classes start, or when things are starting to open up, approaching a professor and saying that, you know, I've got all this computing experience, can I work with you remotely on a data set, or do you have something for me? That's one approach. I mean, working hands-on in the lab now is, of course, not possible. So we just have to do what we can and do the best we can. That's what I usually tell people.
And make it's a delicate balance between providing training, if you're a professor, and make work. The last thing that we want to do is make our lives harder and not have a meaningful research experience for you. So, you know, it's a challenge. I would say that if you're going to be getting the Python coding experience, which I totally agree with the panel is really, really valuable, what would knock people's socks off if they're a professor is if you do that coding and simultaneously read their body of work, okay? Anticipate a hole and then code something that could help fill that hole, okay? So if you look at the body of work and you say, I've noticed, I think that this condition really needs to be run. You know, it's a total confound, it's a problem. It's probably a confound because you hand-made the stimuli, but if you computerize the stimuli and code it up, you can control for that. Here you go. I looked at all the experimental parameters and I've designed this for you. Like, that's incredibly impressive to see a student who can read the body of work, understand the theory, the motivation, identify a gap, and then create an experiment that addresses that gap. It's not going to be perfect, especially if you're a first year or a sophomore. right? But the fact that you even tried will be really impressive, and will make professors see that you're not going to be nothing but work, right? Professors need to know that, like, yes, I'll train a student. Yes, this is worth it. But it also, it needs to be a good fit for everyone. That would be really practical if you use the coding and you turned it towards whatever the professor you want to work with it's their overall.
I want to underline something that you said, because I think it's something that Professor Mayu said as well. And I want to bring that out too. Remember that faculty are thinking about you. They are thinking about how to make the learning experience better. They are thinking about your senior thesis projects and how to make it possible in this moment. They are always thinking about how to make the research experience work for their labs, plus also your learning experience. So it's not like you are having these thoughts by yourself and wondering how you're going to make it happen for yourself. The faculty are thinking about how to support you, because that work also supports them and the product of their research. But Professor Mayu, I'm not sure if you wanted to weigh in on this kind of tactical things that you can be doing as well.
Like, the one thing I was going to say, like, I've had some students, sometimes like showing initiative goes a long way on this, right? Is what we're saying. Like, even now, like, most lab groups are having like Zoom lab meetings. And sometimes if you know you want to be in a lab group, if you start going to those meetings and like showing up, paying attention, then pretty soon you start doing, like, you're working your way in, and before you know it, it works really well. Like the first 1 or 2 meetings, sometimes you might just sort of just have to be there and maybe not say much, and you might not get ideas yet. But usually what's happened with me in a lot of our meetings, it's like once someone shows up once or twice, you realize they're serious, and then pretty soon they're part of the group. They sort of become part of like the family and the group and the lab group, and they start working with you. So I think that's one of the, like, I think this sort of goes, it's not the exact question you asked, but this I was sort of going back to the same idea of, like, I think it was Colleen saying, just sort of starting to get involved in what you want to do and show initiative and learning these skills. And it's really, once it happens, people, like, I'm always, so it's when I have students around that are showing initiative and going forward, it's exciting, because you can go for new questions and new ideas and new data analyses. I think that's the exciting part.
Yeah, and I think there is something really practical that you said that has come up a couple of times this week for folks who've been in these events, is be proactive in bringing groups of people together. So even if you're not meeting regularly with a lab group right now, connect with a couple of different students, try to tackle a problem, try to build something, continue the kind of collaborative work that you do in the lab in more informal settings, and bring that work to faculty and say, we've worked together on developing some responses to the data that you generated in this experiment. And, we think we have a few ideas together to move forward. I'd love to hear a little bit too about, what it means to you all. You've all advised so many students. What does it mean to you when a student proceeds to, a career that leverages their STEM education in maybe a surprising way that's outside of academia? Like, what advice do you have? What do you typically say to students who are interested in, practicing psychology in like an educational space, or practicing physics in a museum space, or environmental science in a consulting space? Like, what are some of the ways that you approach thinking about STEM for other careers that leverage research interests?
I would say the students that I have advised, many of them have not gone on to a very specific niche in cognitive development PhD programs. They've gone on to do all sorts of interesting things, and really they just needed to be open-minded about what the world was offering them, what their circumstances offered them, and what they were interested in pursuing. Trying out, they basically were trying to do a little bit of everything at once. The ones that I've seen who have gone on to be very, very happy. Working at Parents Magazine as an editor, working in marketing for using like their psychology and quant skills. There are plenty of things that you can end up doing. A curriculum director at a children's museum in Pittsburgh. Research does open doors not just to other research, but people you interact with in the course of your research and the skills that you gain. So I think psychology is weird in that it's sort of generically very useful. Does require some specialization, entry-level jobs, but you really can find something that you love because it's very broad.
So I mean, I can say a little. Actually, a lot of I've had many research students, both graduate and undergraduate, and high school. The vast majority haven't necessarily gone on to graduate school. They've really applied their skills very widely. But I think that there's a common theme in all of their experiences. One is they're able to work in a large group. I work with a large group of people. They are able to be team players. They are part of a whole and they collaborate and can contribute. They have technical skills in the sense that almost all of them develop some sort of coding, computing, analytical skills. They're interested in science, but they don't necessarily want to have a scientific career, although they support and enjoy science. So I can, yes, some have gone on to graduate school, some are professors, some have won national, Science Foundation fellowships, but then equal numbers of them have gone and made their own industry in computer science, technical. Some have worked for, defense firms. Some have done this work for computing firms. Some are doing data development. Others are high school science teachers. One of them is a, campaign advisor for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So, this is like wide range of experiences, but they've all picked up some technical skills as, part of their research. So I don't think that you can pretty much do what you want. I mean, the most important thing is to have a passion for something, if you really want to make it work, and then you can apply the skills pretty much anything you want to do. It's important to pick something that I always tell my students, if someone asks me, what do you think I should do? Should I go here or here? I always say that, this is going to be your life and you'll be living there and you'll be doing something, and you should pick something that you will enjoy, not because it's the best or it's the right or it's whatever. You are living your life there. But do what makes you enjoy it and have fun.
No, I agree with you. And I think sometimes I know I'm not the best advisor for those areas because, right, we're a little, like, I know how to go to graduate school and do research, right? That's my expertise. And so I think what I do is I know when I see students that want to do science, otherwise I know to push them to AJ. I know to get them in contact with our other alums who are doing similar things. So it's like, sometimes it's a little, right? It's like, we're the same way. There's so many students have gone on great paths, even with, even if you go to graduate school, that doesn't mean you're going into academia. There's so many great paths with graduate degrees these days also. And so it's, right. And I think exactly you said, like, follow your passion. There's so many options out there, both of you are saying. And it's like, I think that is like the beauty of Beyond Barnard, like sort of linking us with you. It's like, you can start to see these different paths. Like I can help you with the graduate school stuff, but we know how to sort of push you the other ways to get help to go to other areas also.
I just put in the chat, we didn't even have to bribe you to say that. We didn't pay Professor Mayu. I do have to say that something that Professor Mukherjee, you said, reminded me of a sentiment that's come up throughout the week is sometimes it's not even a specific, technical skills are increasingly important in a range of career fields, of course, but I think something that Barnard students it's kind of come to light, bring to multiple different trajectories is a commitment to the scientific method. It's the critical thinking capacity as a scientist. It's the capacity to understand the importance of collecting empirical evidence. And then, you know, the close faculty support makes a difference at a liberal arts institution like Barnard. You have such close relationships in the lab that you have the ability to really communicate in small groups about what the meaning of the data is, to translate it for multiple stakeholders, to bring a whole set of different kind of qualitative skills to the process of quantitative analysis, which I think is really distinctive. I also want to make sure that everybody knows the floor can be open officially. I can throw out softball questions all day and listen to faculty talk, but I also want to make sure that everybody feels comfortable either chatting questions or, you know, if you want to go on mute and just kind of give a shout to ask a question that might be on your mind, we're totally open to that as well. And I'll leave it silent for a second. Okay, I can keep talking too. Guys, we're not going to get used to the Zoom thing. I just know it's the case. I did, by the way, this week, just so the faculty know, I did breakout rooms and polls on Zoom, and it was just so much fun for me to, to feel like an expert. So I'm wondering, I always ask this question, no matter what panel it is, you know, thinking back from, you know, the vantage point that you occupy now, thinking back to when you're in undergraduate as a scientist just getting started. Professor McCrink, you said you arrived late to research, for example. What's the one piece of advice that you wish you could have had in that moment that you do have the capacity to offer now, given how far you've come? I think cats on Zoom is an important piece of advice. Make sure your pet is there.
Okay, so
somebody else speak because I need to think about this.
Yeah, I have to say, it's funny. The one piece of advice that I would give would be, you can and should take breaks and have a nice work-life balance, but when you're working, you should just work very hard. You should not think oh, that's somebody else's responsibility. You know what I mean? Like, if you see a task that needs to be done in the lab, you just step up and you do it, and don't wait for someone to tell you to do it. If you are self-sufficient and have initiative, it will just get you so impossibly far in life. This is very global advice, but I really feel like the students I have who don't thrive, and I can just tell after a month or two of working with them, and there's not that many at Barnard, they don't work their hardest. Whenever you're working, you should work your hardest. That would just be my general piece of advice. And I recognize that it's totally generic, but it's deeply true. I think people think, well, no one will notice if I don't work my hardest. Yeah, they might not notice, but they'll definitely notice if you do work your hardest.
It's really funny you say that, Colleen, because when I look back, or when I think that I look back on my early years, and I was just starting out in research, and maybe my first postdoc job and last few years of undergraduate. The two things come to my mind. If I look at it now and I say, I wish. Number one is those were the funnest days. I always tell people that, I spent all day doing things that I liked. I didn't have to do anything else. It wasn't real. It's like, I was just like having so much fun. I always tell young people, this is the time for you to really pick up knowledge, enjoy what you're doing, learn the stuff, because now, I wish I had time to read a paper, and I'm just like so distracted. I'm doing something else, 10 things at the same time. It gets worse with age. And I look at it now and I wish I'd done more of that. I wish I'd spent more time. And number two, it's funny, Colleen mentioned Because when I look back and I say, why did I do a little bit more work? I had so much time, why did I work a little harder? So I wish I'd worked harder then. And I think one bit of advice is exactly what Colleen said. If you can do it, work hard now when you have the time. It's going to really help you later.
And later on, you don't want to work that hard. If you don't work hard when you're young, you're squandering your opportunity to ever truly work hard. Because when you get older, you're just tired. You got like the world weighing you down. Do it while you're not tired. You guys are you students listening to this.
Like people who have kids at home, for sure.
Oh yeah, no, I'm tired all the time. It's like this is when you can sit there and read an entire professor's body of work. Guess what? You can't do that when you're 50. You will literally never read somebody else's entire body of work and take weeks just pouring into one particular topic because you got too much else on your plate. So it's a surprisingly good opportunity for you to work very insularly and very hard for the next.
Very true. Well spoken.
I don't think I can top those. That was great. The only thing I say is choose happy people to work with. Like if you're in a group, like if you're going for a lab, just make sure it's a happy. So like you're right, it's a happy social setting. If you can do that, that makes life. It makes all that work much nicer.
I think that interlocks so effectively with the work hard. I mean, it's not worth it to do all of that work if you're not also nurtured by that work and the people you're doing it with. And so much in the sciences depends on your relationship with your PI, with your mentor. And I've seen so many students, not so much at the undergraduate level at Barnard, happily, but in previous lives at the University of Chicago, that you think you have to work with this person because they do the ultimate work, and it doesn't matter that they're really terrible to their students. That's the most important. Thinking about picking your boss and not your job always applies in the sciences too. Picking happy people to work with and for is a really good way to balance the working hard while you can.
So, I would love to hear from you guys. I mean, this is a small and friendly group, right? We are not scary. So if anyone has questions, happy to answer. You can write to us anonymously, maybe.
I think it's a long week of Zoom can be tough. Oh, I see a hand from Hannah. Go ahead, Hannah.
Hello.
We can hear you.
Thank you guys so much for all your advice so far. And I also really enjoyed hearing about your research and career paths. I'm a bio major and I'm also interested in a career in research. And I'm wondering what drew you guys to working in academia specifically, and what parts, I guess, you enjoy most about it.
Brian, do you want to go first?
I don't have a great story. Like I was doing my graduate work and I really enjoyed doing all the research, and so I was sort of like I was on the treadmill, right? That doesn't sound great, but and I went and did a postdoc and I enjoyed my postdoc research, right? I was enjoying it, and then the academic job came along, and it was like, and I'm not saying that flippantly because it's like this beautiful job came along where I could teach and do research, and I was just really fortunate. Like I was doing something, I was just, at a couple of points I thought I was going to have to leave academia just because of how things were going to work out, but I was just really fortunate how like things lined up and I was able to keep doing research. So that's not a, I don't know if that's a.
I think that's a kind of like what I feel as well, Brian. Again, I didn't plan any of this. Things happened in some sense, but the one thing about academic jobs, as you probably know, there's a lot of intellectual freedom. So if you like working on research, if you enjoy that, if you want to build your own program and you don't want to, have to listen to somebody else's research plans, you want to build your program, you have ideas, that academia gives you that freedom, so we are all part of academia. We are, at this institution, we are at Barnard, we are affiliated with Columbia, we have great colleagues, we work internationally. Our main job is to teach, so we teach during the semesters, but into sort of intertwined with that, and even during the summers, the primary job that we do is research, and we get funding. We have to apply for federal grants, which is in some sense, federal grants is a way to support ideas that are peer reviewed and that have promise. So it feels good to be in that kind of sort of a creative world. So that's what drew us into academia. The other thing about academia that I enjoy is students, because I mean you're basically, and Brian I'm sure agrees with me. We're sort of creating the next generation, right? I mean, you guys will be in research. You will take it to the next step. I mean, you just look at the progress that has happened in research. It's always the next generation that takes it to the next level. So, we may be teaching you in our classes, but we're really hoping that you guys will take up the research and take it to the next step. And that's how progress is made. And in my case, I can say that it was a conscious decision to come into academia, because I did have a point in my history where I could have gone and worked for NASA for the rest of my life. And I kind of told myself that it's only in academia that I'm going to get a new bunch of students every year. Whereas at NASA, I'm just going to get older and I'll be with a bunch of older people. And where is the creativity in that? So I think academia offers you the ability to work with young people who are passionate and who are willing to work hard. And as Colleen said, I'm sure she worked really hard, just judging from the way she speaks about it. So that's an opportunity. But then the other thing I should mention is that sometimes, getting an academic job may not be that. Things have to fall in place. It's not that every research job ends in an academic job. And it would be a mistake to get into research saying, the only job I'll have is academia. There are so many other options. So, I would say if you enjoy this path, start it and then see what comes out of it and be flexible.
So I'm wondering, so a question came in to the chat privately to me, and just on this point, and if you can dilate just a little bit on, other places that you've seen folks do research. I know in physics especially, but also in other fields, in biology, there's government careers, there are government research labs. Or
absolutely. I think that you should look at government research labs. And for you guys specifically, because you're undergraduates, there are postbac programs, and AJ knows about this, and we can offline send some places where they do accept postbacs. And postbacs in national research labs, there are so many, and it's not just physics and astronomy. It's biophysics, it's biology. There are many opportunities where you go in for 2 years, you work in the lab, and then you can then apply for graduate schools after that, or jobs, or stay on. And if you're part of a national lab, there's also training programs. So, let's say you go into a national lab, you go into a postbac, you get into one of these jobs, and you don't necessarily take the traditional research academic path, you can still get trained. There are opportunities that they offer to train you to get to the next levels, whether it's in management or in academia or in research. So look into those. And there are also a lot of private companies that hire, especially if you have a sort of a science or a STEM background. So yeah, there are options out there.
I actually, Brian, in your field, there's so many positions in environmental sciences research that, you can help nonprofit organizations do environmental assessments, in so many different ways.
Consult, there's so many, yeah.
Yeah, so if you have commitments to research and producing research that has impact in the world, we talked several times this week about policy careers. Obviously, I don't know if you want to talk about mailmen at all, but to conduct research in a public policy or public health context is a huge pathway for Barnard students and alumni that lots of folks pursue as well.
No, exactly.
Well, I want to be mindful of time. I know that Professor McCrink had to hop off a little bit early, but thank you to her virtually ex post facto. Thanks to the two of you. It's really fun to just hear your perspectives on research and your path, and obviously super helpful. To everybody who stuck through to the end in Q&A today, thanks for that. Thanks for coming to multiple events. I saw a couple of you all have been here multiple days this week. I hope it's been a helpful week. We'll circulate a survey so that we can understand what's been helpful, what could use some improvements. I always say that we're not afraid of bad feedback. We're only afraid of being bad and not knowing it. So tell us what you need to know in order to feel like you're progressing in your work, both inside the classroom and in whatever career path you're choosing. And so long, Professor. And we will talk to you soon. Have a good weekend. We'll be in touch. Professor Mayhew, thank you. You've stuck it out to the end.
Okay.
Bye.
Always happy to, AJ.
Thank you.
Yeah.